Welcome to the Troubadour Show. We're going to be talking about the greatest book of all time. We'll see if you guys agree. I love this book, but we're going to be talking about the Iliad. And I will be telling you that I read it as a kid because someone told me it was the greatest book of all time. So I read it thinking it was that. And we could talk about, what that means.
Mhm.
I don't want to say old guest, old co-host, like
No, I
previous
just turned
co-host.
45, but
Yeah,
that's
you're
not
not
old,
old.
is it?
Yeah, you're
Maybe in
not as
ancient
old.
Greece, maybe Achilles
Exactly.
wise, it's old.
You're not
But
Homeric old, but we old in the sense of you and I used to do co-hosting of
yeah,
shows a
yeah.
lot, and hopefully we'll do some more. And if you want to find more of Luke's content and what he's doing, he teaches at Literature at Our House. He has a book that I always recommend everybody get, Touching the Art, and you can go to, is it touchingtheart.com?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Touching the Art. So literature at ourhouse.com, where he teaches literature, and touchingtheart.com, where he does some of the greatest, in my opinion, discussions and interactions, especially for first timers, for anybody, but especially first timers into painting and sculpture and the visual arts. So you just got done, Luke, teaching the Iliad. Now, is this your first time teaching the Iliad?
No, third time. So I taught it three times over the past 6 years. 6 years ago, I taught it first time, and it was the first time I read it. And I had a hard time with it. Taught
You
it
had a hard
again,
time.
yeah, 3 years ago, a little bit better. And then this past time, reading it and listening to the audiobook version of it to read along with it, which was really helpful. And reading a different translation too than I had before.
Mm,
I had a great time
yeah.
reading it and discussing it with my high school students. Yeah.
So why did you want to read it the first time you read it? Like, what brought you to it?
Because I'm a fan of the Odyssey and I've
Okay.
read and taught the Odyssey and I love the Odyssey. And I'd started the Iliad and I heard a little bit about the Iliad. And there was one thing that kind of intrigued me about the Iliad that I'd heard about it, that it wasn't the story of the Trojan War, that it wasn't like
Mm,
Ilium and the Iliad. It was
mhm,
much more particular. It was all about Achilles. And I'd heard like it begins with like Achilles' wrath, and that the
mhm,
story was about this, Achilles' wrath. So that kind of unity, the one and the many, as the ancient Greek philosophers would put it, that is
mhm,
so much part of ancient Greek culture. I wanted to see that. I wanted to see that kind of focused, purposeful thinking that went into a story that I'd started before and kind of felt like it was all over the place. So that's what kind of drew me at last to, okay, let me get back into it because this is an ancient Greek and they loved it and it was one of their Bibles. So that's what got me into it.
yeah, I mean, in a sense, that's where the whole idea of a canon comes from. Is that in the Bible? I think is this like essential reading that is ubiquitous across a culture, as the framework for how their whole culture is operating on.
Mhm.
In medieval times, it's the Bible, right? During the ancient Greek times and Roman times, because
Mhm.
Roman texts are heavily influenced and based on Homer. So I think if you're at all interested in Greco-Roman history or anything. And we all know from popular TikToks that men think about Rome every 15 minutes, right? Is that the word 15 minutes or 10 minutes?
Yeah, I don't
Every,
remember, like or at
something
least
like
once
that.
a day
It's
or
like,
something.
I
Yeah,
thought it was like people think about
15
sex.
minutes, not as often as sex. Come
Here's what I
on.
was gonna say. I was like,
No,
I thought men are supposed to about sex every 10 minutes, like or 5 minutes, but
I think
now
it's
it's
15
Rome.
seconds actually.
15 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, what else do you think about? Like, I like sex and all, but come on. All right, let's move on. So, I think, so it's this epochal work. If you're interested in the Greco-Roman times at all, if you just saw the Gladiator movie, you ought to learn a little bit about the basis of what those people thought and how they think and what shaped their behavior, their actions, and you know, how they were. And I think you have to read the Iliad and the Odyssey to do that. You have to read Homer. So that to
Yeah.
me is a big part of it. If you're like I have a thesis, and I'm not alone in this. This isn't for me, that you cannot understand history if you don't read the great shaping literature of that and art, really, of that era. Like, you need to experience 17th, century Renaissance art, literature, poems, Shakespeare, Don Quixote, the artwork, and the philosophy, and the major works that they do, if you really are interested in learning about that era. So
Mhm.
that's why I think everybody should read this. Is
Well, I'll
one reason.
yes and you and say, of course, that's foundational. to an understanding of literature as such, foundational to understanding Western civilization. I want to add one more little pitch that maybe might come through in our discussion, which is if you want to explore and learn to introspect and find out who you are as a human being
Yeah.
and what makes you tick,
Mm-hmm.
I think the Iliad is for you.
Yeah.
So that's my initial pitch, and if at the end of our discussion, if we'll see if I've conveyed that or we've discussed that or how that comes across.
Well, can I ask you? Because I agree with
Yeah.
that 100%, of course, but I think that is the case of any great work of literature. Like that's one of the defining attributes. Like if you're going to read,
Mm.
as it should, like that's why it resonates over time.
Yeah,
Is
so I'll make a particular slant. I find the Iliad to be very psychological
mm,
and to speak to things that are not just broadly we're human beings, but to issues that you have today as a modern human being that are about looking into yourself and understanding your emotions.
hmm
I found this, there's a lot of warfare, tons of warfare, lots of fights, lots of killing, and maybe we're going to share like our top
kill of
kills.
the week. I like what you said that. That was your thing. I love that.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
some vividly descriptive kills,
Yeah.
but at base, I think that this story is about how do you handle your emotions. And so that's maybe something
Mm.
that we'll explore. So
Oh, that's a good
psychological
one. Yeah.
introspection and understanding not just who you are as a human being, but what your feelings can do to yourself and to harm other people
hmm
and where they come from and how to handle them.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think I would agree with that 100%. And I would even, let's talk about that in a minute. I want to ask you for instances about this, either about that or other issues in the Iliad that really stuck out to you in
Yeah.
this third reading that are powerful for you. And maybe we can talk about personal, we could start off with some
Yeah.
personal connections to the word,
Mm.
because what you just said is something that I try to argue all the time and I love it. And I want to talk about it more, about the specific particular value of reading this work. And
Mm. Yeah.
there's some values that are true of all works, and that's the mirror value, teaching you something about self-awareness and things like that. But there are unique things about this that I think are important for us to all as humans, and I think you hit on definitely some important ones. But do you have any, like, for instances for you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
you mind starting and I'll
So I mentioned earlier that I don't know ancient Greek, but I've heard scholars say that the first word is rage. Literally, the first word is rage. And then
Mhm.
Homer asking, "Hey, muses, help me sing about Achilles' rage." And the whole plot, if we want to say that the Iliad has a plot, and I want to say, yeah, the Iliad does kind of have a plot, is about Achilles evolving anger and what quells it. And the opening scene is, and I'm just restating here, is Agamemnon says, "Hey, you know what? I know I'm putting a microscope here, and I'm being asked to do something I don't want to do, but if I'm gonna do it, then I've got to be recompensed somehow. And Achilles, you're the one suggesting to me that I give up my beautiful concubine, so I want to take yours as recompense because I am the king. I am the main man here in this army. And you better give me your Briseis because I lost my concubine." And Achilles is like, "Oh man, you are dishonoring me. You are," and to put it in other ways, "you are making a fool of me in front of other people. You are not recognizing my worth. And if at
Mhm.
any time you've gone into your boss's office and asked for a raise and they said, 'I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you a raise,' that feeling, that anger you might have of somebody is not recognizing my true value,
Not just
that's what
somebody,
Achilles is
the
feeling.
leader,
The leader.
right? Yeah, the leader
The,
that
the
you
leader's
rely
not
on as a,
recognizing you are not being recognized when you
yeah,
should be. And Achilles should be because
yeah,
he's the greatest of all time.
yeah.
And so that's the beginning. And I just kind of introspect and think back to myself, okay, when have I felt like I wasn't appreciated?
Yeah.
Oh man. And you're like, okay, dang it, I've been like Achilles too much. And Achilles takes it to extreme. He says, "You know what? If you guys if this leader doesn't appreciate me, let me show you how much of value I am to your army, and let me get out of the war, sit
Mhm.
in my tent,
He
sulk in my
shrugs.
tent. He shrugs,
Yeah.
and then yeah, then you'll see how much you need me, and then the story evolves, and that they really see how much they need him, and
Yeah.
how much Agamemnon needs him, and Agamemnon comes to regret a little bit of, oh man, you know what? Shoot, maybe I should have not dishonored Achilles that way. So that
Yeah.
beginning, that connection about when have you felt
Yep.
slighted about your your view of your value to the world.
Yeah. Or to your organization, like you said, a job. Yeah, 100%. And, Achilles obviously proves that he was correct in the story, but I think it's an important part of the story that you're saying is it starts with this conflict between two leaders. Now, I thought it's important, maybe we could bring up now the idea of that I had I that of spoiling or not spoiling.
Mm.
Because to me, that is why it needs to be spoiled. And that why this work and really the whole epic cycle of the Trojan War cycle needs to be known to the reader, especially today, before they approach it. Otherwise, it's too overwhelming. It busts the crow, as it were. It busts the mind of to have too many things a reader's trying to understand about this very foreign world. So to have a framework, a grappling, in my mind, not to mention Homer's artifice, like what you're mentioning about there's unity there, like he's doing that in a world where everyone knows these stories, and I think that's what allows him to have the idea in a sense of I'm just going to focus on a few days, a few weeks, or I think it's a few days at toward the end, but not the complete end of this 10-year war. So, and that's an important lesson for us as people who are so inundated with stories today that we don't have any conception that stories were invented. Like we take it for granted. But stories and structures and the way that our whole mind, I think, operates today in how we think of unity and story starts here in a sense. Like that's why it's the beginning of the canon. And there's other cultures, and I'm not an expert in other cultures, but when I've read some other cultures, like they will have stories, but they tend to have no unity. They tend to meander. It's just a bunch of anecdotes. And it's like, this is a really important invention in the history of the human mind of creating the story. And I think you need to have spoiled the whole thing so you could get an appreciation of that and other things like what you just said about the story of Achilles and Agamemnon, because you need to understand everybody who listened to this story in ancient times knew who Achilles was, the greatest warrior. I mean, he's like Superman in a sense. He's like the Hercules of this cycle. And he's the greatest warrior. And then the Agamemnon, right off the bat, at the opening lines, I'm taking your woman from you, which is the worst that, the woman that you conquered, this tribe, I'm taking your prize because I can, essentially. So, what do you think about spoiled, not spoiled?
Okay, so I definitely agree that having some background information is very important. But I'll dispute one thing that you said. You said
Okay.
everybody in ancient Greece knew the story of the Iliad before they listened to it.
Okay.
Not the person who for the first time hears it, not for the child who for the first time hears it. I've read the Iliad many times. A lot
Sure.
of my students also have know the story of the Trojan War, know that Achilles dies. Most of our audience probably knows the story, and so we can go into the Iliad and as you mentioned, appreciate what choices Homer is making about the story that he wants to tell within the broader story. But I get a lot of juice from not knowing. I get a lot of juice from the Netflix show that stops and leaves me wanting more. I get a lot of juice
Sure.
for going forward and for being excited about reading the story by keeping certain things. So if I'm teaching the Iliad, I'm not going to say, "All right, everybody, let's read the Iliad." No, you got to know who Achilles first is at the beginning. You got to know this. You got to have the background leading up to this. You got to know what was going on, why they're fighting the Trojan War, because all that is presupposed knowledge when you get there. But there are a couple questions that come to mind that I when I was rereading it and I'd forgotten a bit, I was like excited to know, like, all right, Achilles gets angry. What's going to stop him from getting angry? What's going to alleviate that anger? And if you don't know the answer to that, that makes it compelling. He's really angry. What's going to get him back to the battlefield? And so that becomes something that you're looking forward to. And as you're going through, it's like, okay, all right. Well, Agamemnon's regretting the fighting because they're getting their butt kicked. And so he sends a bunch of an embassy, Odysseus and Ajax, and would offer him so much wealth, gives him Briseis back, along with all these other women. You get so much. And Achilles, I'm waiting right there. Is he going to accept or refuse that? And so for that moment of tension, to keep the tension, I don't want to tell the whole story, summarize the whole story beforehand. I want to give some scaffolding, but not quite every detail that you have questions about as you're going forward.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I wouldn't give every detail. Yeah, I think what I mean I just mean the Trojan War cycle. So, the apple of discord with Paris choosing between.
That definitely, you
like,
got to tell that.
You got to
because that's what leads up to.
Yeah. So I guess that's what I mean by spoiling is like there's that, but I would also so I wouldn't give the details. I would just say, I have like a whole, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I have like a list of things, of major events that we go through when I go through this and teach this. That includes some of what happens in the Iliad, some major things. Like, and here I'm going to spoil something. Hector dies, right? So and then that Achilles dies as part of the Trojan War cycle. And I think what I agree with you is saying is maybe don't even say when and how that happens, because that could be part of the surprise. Because like the point of this is, when does the Trojan Wars happen or the Trojan horse happen? When, who does that? How do they do it? Where is it said? That's, I think, other interesting questions we could have. And that's helpful for how do we get those stories? And I just have to say one thing where I will have to say I don't 100% agree with you and how important this is, I don't even know, but I don't actually agree that kids in ancient Greek would not have known that ahead of time. Because if you look at the artwork of their era, the pottery, this is like the mother's milk thing. Is like they are being told these stories around the fireplace all the time. I mean, this is ubiquitous. And then when depending on the era, you might get a reading from a great reader, a great poet over a course of day
you're
of
probably
this
right about
particular
that.
work.
Yeah.
But the kids, I think already, if they were there, I don't even know if
they would have known all these stories, all the stories that Homer, or we'll put quote unquote Homer in there. They are crafted out of the mythology that's already present, and
that's part of their
hearing
whole
from their
life.
grandma and grandpa. Yeah.
So that is part of. But I take your points, and I I'll even try to adjust a little bit my own sake because I think I'll probably lean towards spoiling more than I should. But I think what you're saying is right about there's certain elements within it and moments like that can be powerful if allowed to read, as long as you have the framework around it so you know what's going on.
So that being said, we're spoiling this, right?
Yeah, we're spoiling stuff. If you haven't read it, it's going to be okay. I mean, I already said Hector's dead. If you didn't know that, he dies. And that's just part of it. Sorry. Now, does Achilles die? I don't know. Maybe I won't spoil that one. I mean, we all know he dies. Obviously. I mean, they're all dead.
Now, I had a big challenge with my students at the very end. I was asking myself, how much do I want to guide them with the ending? Because several students were like, oh, I can't wait for the Trojan horse to come.
Yeah.
And so I decided to just let them kind of experience it, to have it be a little bit of like, oh, Homer didn't even include the Trojan horse. What does that mean? To have that kind of disappointment and confusion for them to see that Homer was doing something very different than telling a story that has been narrated over and over again, that he's focusing on one thing.
Yeah. And I think
rage of Achilles.
Yeah. And in a first introduction and for high school, junior high school, when you're introducing this, my view is give them the whole thing, let them experience it for the first time, because a lot of those questions are more advanced questions. Yeah. Like, how do we know about so for instance, there's a scholarly question. Did Homer have a conception of Achilles' heel? And the answer I've read is no, that comes later.
Oh, okay,
that's an addition.
Yeah.
And so if you guys know that, it's so like that, That's an important and like actually one scholar I just have to say this because I love this. Like one scholar put it, it's kind of ridiculous traditionally in like the way that Homer puts it because he puts so much emphasis on armor. So if like why wouldn't Achilles just put armor in his heel or something like something like that, right? And it's like, so it's but again, the Achilles heel thing is probably not even a tradition known to Homer when he's writing this.
Hmm.
It comes later. So there's a question of, well, what are the mythology? Because a lot of it is just different people throughout hundreds of years coming up with
Oh,
these
you want to get into
stories.
the whole Homer question?
Sure, we could bring that up
I mean,
briefly.
I prefer
Might
to
as
hear
well.
what you like about the Iliad in our
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
time. Yeah,
I wasn't
and
going
then
to go
maybe
that
if
one
we have a little bit
direction.
of time, it comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like thinking of Homer. He's
I
one
think
guy.
I
Yeah, I
prefer
like to
that.
think of that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's adjustments over time and people kind of adapted it, but I like to take it. Okay, here we have one story. We're going to treat it as if it's one whole.
Yeah.
And if
And
go
it
ahead.
makes
So
sense. Yeah, I agree with that basically. And I think there probably was a Homer, some sort, just a great
you have faith,
poet
faith
that put it
in
together.
Homer and
Yeah.
the
Um,
ancient Greek Bible.
but
So
so my connection to it is what you want?
yeah, I'd love to your
Well,
connections and maybe your favorite parts and favorite
sure.
characters and
My connection is to when I was, I've told the story a million times on this channel. Like 9 or 10 years old, I was told, I was not good at anything in school. I was good at baseball. And in school, though, I was good at nothing. And they told me I scored high in reading comprehension. And that's it. So math, science, anything else I was not good in. But this, I was like, as a 10-year-old, I was like, oh, okay, what does that mean? And so I asked, okay, if I took that as I'm a good reader. So I asked my teacher at the time, what was the greatest book I've ever written? And she said, the Iliad. So I went out and I made my parents buy the Iliad. And it was just some random book on at Barnes and Noble, or I think it was actually, I don't know, it wasn't Barnes and Noble at the time, it's something else. And so I went home and I started reading it. And I remember crying through a lot of it because I didn't understand a word of it.
oh,
And I was like,
oh,
I'm not
it's
even good at this.
oh,
So I was like, oh my God, what am I good at? And, it's taken me a long time, but it's part of what's inspired me to do Troubadour magazine, to do translations of it and things like that, is to make it accessible for a precocious reader who wants to experience it and understand it, because there's a lot of barriers that are in the way. And if we have time, I brought several translations, very famous translations, and then a little one that I did to kind of show this and kind of show
mhm.
what's possible. And there's,
Okay. So then,
yeah,
Kirk, when did you stop crying and start enjoying?
I think after I read Ayn Rand actually and got back into the classics, so probably 1920,
Okay.
is I started giving the classics a
1920?
chance.
Boy, you've been around for a while.
Yeah, 19 or 20 years old. Somewhere
Oh, okay.
yeah, somewhere in that realm. And yeah, so I started reading like Les Mis after Atlas Shrugged and some of these books. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try the Iliad again. I tried a version. I was like, oh, I get this now. And then I read another and another, and I've read several versions over the years.
So in the story, what hooks you? Are there characters that hook you? Are there moments that hook you? Are there, like I described, okay, I empathize with Achilles and can think of myself in his place. Are there particular scenes or that when you read it, you're saying, "Ah, okay, this is compelling," or "I like this character"? Is it the battle scenes? Is it the insults that are flung at each other? Is it the poetry of it?
So it always depends on the read. This last one, I was actually noticing things. This last read, I was noticing things about the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles. And I never realized that Patroclus is older than Achilles. And I don't know how many times but I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. But he is. And there's a moment where it's said, where Patroclus says, like, I'm his elder and blah, blah. And I was like, I never caught that in any other reading, but he's actually a few years older.
I didn't know
And
that
so it's
either.
an interesting dynamic between them about how much they care about each other. But Patroclus's view is his thing is he brings wisdom and Achilles brings the war. Besides, like he's the warrior. They're both warriors, but Patroclus is obviously the second. And Patroclus really wants to get back to Achilles to advise him. He's trying to advise him through this tricky situation, as you're putting it, especially in his internal situation. So I really like the relationship a lot. I think that's it's not a big part of the book in the sense of a lot of focus. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It is a big part of the book, but it's not a big focus in certain regards, like them interacting with each other. So that's one.
Yeah, Homer needed an editor. You're spending books
He
and
was
books
there.
having these battles, but your central story is about this relationship between
Yeah,
Achilles and Patroclus. Can we have more screen time with that? And I
with that.
totally agree with you. I love that relationship. And the difference between the two characters. Sometimes a lot of these characters kind of blend into each other. Okay, here's another hulking guy who likes to fight and sometimes deals with cowardice and has to be roused up, and another one,
Mhm.
and another one, and another one, and reading the Iliad this last time, I really got a sense of a difference in personality
Mhm.
between Patroclus and Achilles.
Achilles.
So
Yeah.
yeah, Patroclus is the one who's like, oh my God, Achilles, because you're sitting out, all the Greeks are being slaughtered by Hector and the Trojans. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. And
Mhm.
he's the one that feels sad.
Yeah.
I I picked out a scene. May I read a
Yeah.
quick
Let's hear it.
scene with
Which,
Patroclus?
oh, you
And
picked
this is
Patroclus
just
too. Okay, good.
and this is just like an innocuous little scene, but it just captures a difference between Patroclus and Achilles. And this is a moment where did I get it or did I cut it out? Oh, I don't even have it. No, I lost it. So,
Oh
oh no, no,
no. Okay,
it's
got it.
collated. That's what it is. All
Okay.
right. So Patroclus is
Yeah.
sent out by Achilles to kind of find out, hey, can you find out what's going on with everybody? And whether or not the Trojans are really winning, like I asked my mom to try to get Zeus to do. And and Patroclus comes by, he's like he's gotta get the word back to Achilles, and like so he's running back to the Achilles tent, and then he stops and he sees one of these Greeks who's wounded, Eurypylus.
Mhm.
I'm butchering pronunciations left and right.
Pronunciation is a difficult one with this book.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna read this scene, and this is the quality that I think really comes through for Patroclus that Achilles doesn't have.
Yeah.
So, and Patroclus said to Eurypylus, "How did we get caught in such a position? What should we do? I've been sent to deliver an urgent message from Nestor, our eminent counselor, to Achilles. Still, I won't abandon you here in your trouble." With these words, he grasped his comrade around the waist and walked him back to his hut. His comrade Eurypylus is wounded. And when his attendants saw him, he spread some ox hides for him on the ground, and Patroclus had him lie down, and with a sharp knife he cut the arrowhead out of his thigh, and he washed off the blood with warm water, and taking a bitter root, he crushed it between his hands, and then he applied it to the gashed flesh, and it took away all of Eurypylus' pain, and the wound began to dry up, and the blood stopped flowing.
Mhm. Yeah, he's more the healer. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
is he's got like concern for others. Achilles is like, I don't care that they're dying out there. I want them to die. They screwed I want to show Agamemnon how they screwed me over. But
I
Patroclus, and
don't.
that's where it leads Patroclus to
Yeah.
saying, hey, please, Achilles, can I go out there and help them? Can I go out there and wear your armor? And
So
our friends are dying. I want to help them.
yeah, I don't want to be I don't want to be too harsh on Achilles. I don't quite see his character as he doesn't care. That I don't think that's fair to his
Oh,
character.
that's a question I have
Like,
that we could maybe talk about. What
yeah.
is Achilles' hierarchy of values?
Yeah,
So, okay,
like
no, go ahead.
because he's in a really interesting situation and his this is part of why I think the context is important. This is the origin of war stories. What do we learn in a war story? What's the point of a war story?
That
I mean,
depends on I think the era.
okay, well, if you want to
Go for
mention
it.
something about that, I think
Yeah,
yeah, I agree with that, but I think like there's something fundamental about war, which is life and death is on the line. I
yeah.
think that's the fundamental going on. And that's a big part of this book. And really, so there's a couple things going on. It's easy to say, sure, Achilles is just upset that he was wronged in some way. But we have to go back to the fact about Achilles to defend him that he knows he's going to die if he stays here. And so this puts him in a category of hero that's unlike anybody else. Patroclus doesn't really know that. And there's actually some moments with Hector, if you really are paying attention, and depending on the translation, some emphasizes better than others, where it's like when he's talking to Astyanax, his wife. No,
Oh,
that's his
no,
son.
that's yeah,
Andromache.
Andromache. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Astyanax is his son who gets scared by the plume. And his wife, when he talks to his wife Andromache, there's moments when he's like, I think I'm gonna die. This guy's gonna kill me. He's way better than me. And then there's moments where he's basically, I think I could do this, right? Which is the state of any human in a war. And it's been pointed out that Hector's the most human-like character in the story. And I think that's true in the sense of you see his family life, you see his brother, he has problems with his brother, he has problems with his dad. There's a general that's not listening to the right kind of omens. And there's all these types of complications that Hector has. And Hector is trying to navigate this and lead his people to not be slaughtered by this invading army and try to take this all on. And so you feel real sympathy for him. And I want to, that's something to talk about more about, like, what was Homer's, who's a Greek's, aim at writing this, right? Because you feel real sympathy for the enemy.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing.
This is not Star Wars with rebels versus the Empire. No,
and I
no,
love it about that's another thing I love about it is, it's one of the first times you get that in literature, I think.
So wait, what about Achilles? What's this? Why do we give Achilles a break?
So Achilles is in a position that's very unlike any other person in the
unlike
world.
Hector's position.
Unlike Hector. So Hector is a normal person who has this, I might die, I might not die. That's how every human is. Like Achilles knows he's going to die. He will definitely die if he stays there. And the thing that I love the most about this is I truly believe, from the literature I've read and studied about, that this is the first time in the history of the world when a character stands up and says, no, I want to live. It's my life. And he says, for nothing as I now see it equals the value of life, of my life, the wealth, the wife, for me. And he says this, and early on, there's a famous quote where he says, and no Trojan ever did anything wrong to me. And it's like, it's a me thing. And it's really, to me, the beginnings, the initial spark of the West and the individuality that I think is a characteristic of the West. Is it fully fleshed out? Of course not. But it's just a little inkling of, like, he starts to think, look, I'm fighting. I'm the best of these guys. I'm the reason they're winning. And they're just arbitrarily going to, and that's the thing. It's arbitrary taking away of my whole purpose. Because here's the thing. The last thing I'll say on this is the omen he has, the prophecy about his death, is that it's this idea of the Greek term of, I think it's kleos and timai, which means glory and honor. Like what people will say about you after you're dead. How that culture represented that, and this is important to understanding the course, is the stuff you get. When you conquer something, who gets the most stuff? The one with the most glory. So when you're in that situation, in that culture, and then all of a sudden you learn he can just take away whatever he wants. That's like, well, I'm going to die for this thing, which is glory, and they're just going to be able to take it away. So I'm not going to do that. So I have a lot more sympathy for Achilles in that sense. And he does in the embassy scene when Ajax talks to him and says, what about the soldiers? He's like, that's when he says, okay, you know what? If they come to the ships, they come to the black ships, I will get involved. So he says that at that point. So it's when they move forward and he's like, I'm not going to help you conquer anybody else. I'm done. Right. And I think that's fair. Like, then I don't think it's him not caring is my argument. Like, it's him saying, I'm not going to kill for you anymore. Right. If I'm not going to get what I want, I'm not going to kill for you anymore because it's my life. And when I started learning that, I just was like, I'm more in love with this than ever.
The thing for me that is like a symbol of what you're talking about has Achilles' love of life is actually the shield that is made. So one thing you're mentioning, Achilles is not in this fight for Agamemnon, for his leader, and he's not in this fight for a greater cause, like for a religious cause or for nationalism. No, he's in fight for himself, for his happiness. for whatever he can get
His
from
glory and honor.
glory
Yeah.
or anything like that. And that kind of and it weighs with him. Okay, he knows he's going to die, but I get glory. But at the same time, you know what? The benefit of sitting out, I'll get to go back home and kind of be happy and live nice. And I like that idea.
Mhm.
And when he eventually comes back in the battle, and we can talk about why he comes back into the battle, and he doesn't have his armor anymore, and his mom gets Hephaestus to make some armor and make a shield. What captivated me about this shield, and it goes on long with this description, it's not a symbol for a certain cause. Like the first thing I think of, let me ask anybody, when you think of an emblem on a shield, the first thing I think of is like one of those Crusader
Crusade.
crosses, the
Yeah.
red
Yeah. Yeah.
crosses, or maybe some lions that show you like, King of England or something like that, Arthurian type of stuff. No, the kind of thing that's here. I'll share my screen here just to show just this image
Please
because
do.
I have it in the
Yeah.
bank. And it's not a great image, but what you have here is a bunch of scenes of kind of daily city life
Mhm.
and daily country life. And I think there are a couple of people that are like arguing about
Mhm.
in a town square. There's a little parade of people with their oxen. All this kind of individual little scenes of everyday life, and that's the symbolic emblem on this fighting gear.
So the version I have that I teach often is EV Ryu,
Yeah,
and he has it broken down the shield in these little subsections. And I won't read them all, but just to kind of build like
yeah.
there's the shield, like, and it's just, and then you read the description, right? It's the shield constellations. There's marriage. There's a whole thing about marriage. There's a whole thing about siege and ambush, plowing, reaping, grape harvest, cattle herding, sheep flocks, things like that. So you're saying it's the whole life death of a civilization in a sense. It's all of civilization
The
represented.
cycle of life, the cycle of
Yeah,
civilization. Yeah.
yeah, on a shield, and like what that represents, the agates, the protector, right? And that I think is really telling of what this is all about. And I think that's part of the structure of the whole story in a sense. And my example for that is and the whole theme, and my example for that is going back to your kill of the week. So I think we should do a kill of the week. As you put it, I love the kill of the week thing. And the reason I
I
say
mean,
that,
we could go like top 20 kills of the week each and have plenty to go around.
well, so
Because I
once
mean, that's war is horrible. War
wars, yeah.
and the Iliad, I mean, people die.
Yeah. And it's been pointed out that the percentage of walking wounds is really small. So there are some wounds that happen, but the vast majority of interactions equals death.
Mm,
Like if you encounter somebody
yeah,
in this,
yeah, yeah.
and that's not the reality of war. The reality of war is that it's mostly wounds. And that was a people argue, and it makes sense to me that this like a part of the point that Homer's trying to make about death is he's not interested in wounded people much, right? The wounded people are, they're wounded and then they're back in the
No,
fight.
this is
But it's like
drama.
if,
This is life
yeah,
and death drama. So
well,
you
but
got a
it's
kill of the week?
you got to kill the week. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is Ajax kills Simoisis. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these either. This
yeah,
is
yeah,
for me on the oath is broken and battle is joined. I don't remember what this is early on
yeah. I think I got this
or
one down
something
too.
like that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's then Ajax, son of Telamon, hit Enthymion's son Simoisis, an unmarried young man at the prime of his youth. His mother bore him by the banks of the river Simois when she was returning from Mount Ida, where her father and mother had taken her to see to their sheep. So they called him Simioisis. His life was too short to repay the parents for their loving care, for it ended when he met the spear of great-hearted Ajax. So I'm gonna skip some because it's a long section. And then so Ajax slaughtered Anthemion's son Simoisis. And what I tended to notice, actually, you know what? I'll say this after you. Go first. You'll
Well,
go
did you
next.
did you skip the part about the gruesome details because that's especially what I want to hear.
Okay, so as the young man advanced among the front ranks, Ajax hit him in the chest by the right nipple. The bronze spear went clean through his shoulder, and he crashed to the ground in the dust like a poplar which grows in the hollow of a great water meadow, its trunk trimmed and the branches sprouting out at the top. A chariot maker cuts it down with his gleaming axe to make the wheel rims of a beautiful chariot, but he leaves it now to lie and season on the bank. So Ajax slaughtered Endymion's son,
Okay.
Samoisis.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are three parts to that. One,
Okay.
I've never heard of the
Yeah.
semiosis guy, but he gets a backstory. And
Hmm.
everybody gets a backstory.
Everybody,
Everybody is an
even if it's short.
individual here.
Yeah.
Even if it's like this guy was really handsome,
Yeah.
but because of that, he couldn't fight. And so everybody gets a little bit of a backstory. There are no insignificant soldiers.
Yeah.
And it's not just, faceless, same uniform people going into battle.
Well, not in the story, but there are
Not in the
nameless
story.
stories.
Yeah,
There
there
are
are
nameless.
those, but
Yeah.
when we're
Not in
dealing
the
with the
story.
fighting,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
This is the second thing is the kill is really visceral.
Hmm.
And I'm going to read a
Okay.
couple
Let's
here
read
that
it.
are absolutely gross, but you said like right nipple, like entering in, and
Yeah.
I mean, there is, if you try to picture that, you're going to,
It's gross. Yeah.
it's horrifically
It's
gross.
reality.
And it's funny how Homer can get that visceral. I
Hmm.
was like, whoa, Homer, I thought we were just kind of lifting up here and, kind of stratified 19th century language from translations. No. And then the third thing here is the metaphors. What is he like? This poplar that falls, and it's not just a poplar that falls, but it's a poplar that falls that's going to be used to make a carriage by a wheelwright or somebody.
Yep.
An
Yep.
extended metaphor for you to visualize
Epic
what
simile, they're called.
you got it.
Yeah.
So here, I'll read one here. Let me pick.
I love the epic similes.
All right, this one kind of combines those three elements too.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I don't remember who the he is. He did not hit him, but its throw was not wasted. The huge stone flew on and hit Cebriones, a bastard son of King Priam, who was holding the horse's reins. This huge stone hit him between the eyes and smashed through his brows and shattered his skull, and his eyeballs fell on the ground in front of his feet. Backward he pitched from the blow, and he fell like a diver over the chariot's rail, and the life left his bones. Oh, this is Patroclus, actually. Then Lord Patroclus, you uttered these mocking words. So this is Patroclus wearing Achilles' armor, pretending to
Yeah.
be Achilles, beating up on the Trojans. And I like these mocking words. So many mocking words. My, what a nimble acrobat this man is. I am sure that he would be skillful fishing for oysters. He could feed many people with all the oysters he found when he dived from his fishing boat, even in stormy weather, to judge by this easy somersault unto the plain. I never knew that the Trojans were such good divers. He's mocking the way he killed this man who
Yeah.
tumbled over from his chariot. Now the one part that's not there is the little bit of background for Cebriones, but there probably was some there before.
There might have been.
The eyes
Yeah.
balls falling out.
I mean, every way you can die in this war, is explained basically. Pretty much every way that's possible, right? Crushing, smashing through faces and skulls and
Yeah.
pelvises and groins. A lot of groins. Like it,
That's there are.
yeah, and
I'm
it's just
surprised.
like that's so brutal.
I think it's probably just thinking about the armor structure. I think that's probably because there's no armor down that area.
Well, yeah, but I think what you're saying, like the point of this, when people read it for the first time, and this is how I usually bring it up to them, is I'll have them read a couple of them, we'll talk about it, and they always think when I say like, what do you think about the deaths? They always talk about the brutality. But then it's really important, like you're pointing out, to really see Homer as an artist is conveying something really interesting with all of these, which is the life, the birth, life, and death of someone, like this whole cycle. Like he's focused on the entire cycle whenever he talks about their death. It's not brutality for brutality's sake. There's a point to it in a sense. And part of what I think a lot of what it adds up to is this deeper theme of the value of life, right? And like in order to really think about and understand the value of life, according to Homer, and I think there's some truth to this, is to know about the ending. is to know the death, that it's going to happen. And then you could tell this story about their entire life in a sense. And that's what he's doing. And, there's a question of like, well, if is the Iliad the story of anybody's life, and who is it? And because who's the main person and some people have asked, some people said it's maybe not even Achilles. Maybe it's Hector.
Oh, I disagree with that. I
No,
totally
I don't
disagree.
know.
So,
You know,
so I agree that there's this, and the underlying idea here is that life is of value to everybody, even some Joe Schmo who's going to get killed. We get 2 words about how he had 50 sheep back home on his little island and married this girl. So everybody has this kind of life cycle that leads up to their death. Now, the question I posed earlier, for me, a plot question: what's going to make Achilles quell his anger towards Agamemnon and get him to go back out to fight? And that is, as you know, Patroclus is killed by Hector. And when Patroclus is killed by Hector, the anger that comes from that supersedes the anger that he had towards Agamemnon. Like, all right, I'm back in. Not because Agamemnon persuaded me to get back in with all those gifts that I rejected, but because now I have something that matters more to me than that dishonoring I had. My love for Patroclus.
Yeah. Now it's personal.
And it's so personal. And you're talking about translations before and different translations. May I share just like these are just a sentence long between 2 different ones?
2 different translations?
2 different translations. So I've been referring to the Stephen Mitchell translation.
Yeah.
And I've read the Robert Fagel's translation before. And the Stephen Mitchell translation is simpler, but sometimes there are details that are left out. And the Robert Fagel's translation is a little bit more complex, but that's
a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Oddly structured, but there may be more details. So the first, I'm going to read the Stephen Mitchell translation. And this is when Achilles finds out that Patroclus is dead and Antilochus has come to tell him. Here it goes, just 2 lines. And Antilochus cried out and wept, holding Achilles' hands as a great man groaned softly. Okay, a touching moment. He's holding Achilles' hands. Now here's Robert Fagel's translation, and listen to what has been left out of the Stephen Mitchell that shows how anguished Achilles is. Antilochus, kneeling near, weeping uncontrollably, clutched Achilles' hands as he wept his proud heart out, for fear he would slash his throat with an iron blade.
Read the first one real quick again.
The first one is simply, and Antilochus cried out and wept, holding Achilles' hands as a great man groaned softly.
Okay, so this is when Antilochus is trying to beg for his life.
No.
Wait, when is this?
This is Antilochus bringing the news that Patroclus is dead.
Oh, okay.
And in the first one, he's like reassuring. In the first translation, it's like, let me hold your hands, Achilles, because I know how sad you are. And the second translation, it's like, let me hold your hands, Achilles, because I know that if I don't pin your hands down, you're going to take your own life.
Yeah, so one of the joys of the Iliad and I think a lot of classical works is the rereading of different translations. And I think because, every translator is going to emphasize different things for different reasons. And that's part of the joy of it in a sense. Now, you could obviously go back and you can learn ancient Greek and you can read that. I think it's a lot of work just to read a book. So if you're not going to be a scholar, I don't think that's a good idea. But I actually find joy in finding these different connections and different things that people focus on, and kind of going through the process a little bit myself has been really interesting to see things that I didn't notice that, weren't as emphasized for whatever reason.
I can't wait till you do learn ancient Greek. And
I don't think I'm going to do that. I just don't know that there's the value in it career wise. Maybe when I'm old or something and I have nothing else to do or something. But anyway, so I think that's part of the joy is reading multiple translations throughout the years. Read it in 10 years, read another version. It's not like you have to read it all the time, or listen to it because you have a better handle on it. Once you've read it a couple times, you can now listen to it in the background or something. And it's
I like listening and reading at the same time. That's really helpful for me.
Cool.
So that the moment where Antilochus is holding down the hands in order to prevent him from committing suicide, that's one of my highlights. That's
Okay.
the anguish of a lover who's lost their beloved, and now they're
Yeah.
going to do something about it. And I mentioned Achilles' hierarchy of values. His love of Patroclus is
Yeah.
higher than
And
feeling maybe his dishonor or his honor. That matters to him more. Now, that was a highlight for me, but I'm curious, are there, so far as we're going through the story, any particular moments that are meaningful to you or that you really like or that's come to you like, ah, yes, I like that moment?
well, there's a moment that um, always touched me, partly because of a poem written in World War One called "I Saw a Man This Morning" by Patrick Shaw, and it's when Achilles runs out naked, essentially, or unarmored, and he's like his Patroclus has been killed. He wants to get in the fight. He wants to stop the Greeks are being pushed back. It's like this chaotic moment. Everything's going wrong, and Achilles' mother Thetis says, "Go run out there and go, brandish your weapon and yell at them." And he's like, "But I don't have any armor. What am I supposed to do?" And so she says, "Don't worry about it. I'll take you cover." And so he goes out there. He screams, right? It shouts in the trenches,
Yeah.
and it's trenches because they built this trench, and that's why this World War One poem is.
Mm.
When you read the book and you listen to this poem, to me, it's chilling. What Patrick Shaw is saying and I think what he's trying to show you and have you feel. And there's like this it's called flame capped Achilles because he's the goddess has given him flames, and I just always think of him there, screaming this, and just the soldiers there all stop and they're like, it's time to stop. Night is happening. Let's stop the fighting because of his fury. And it's just, this idea of this man, this god. He's a god. He's a half god coming and fighting for these men, right? And he's back in the fray. The Greek men, I mean, the Greek soldiers who are dying, they're losing, everything's gonna fall apart. And you have this God on their side now.
What do
And
you like about that scene?
I just like the powering resonance of it. It's just very, I've never been to war, and I've always been fascinated by the war epic and the war story because it always, it's just an empathy thing of like, there but for the grace of God go I. Like I would have gone to war. My dad went to war. Like so many men went to war throughout history. Very likely I would have been one based on my social class and things like that. And it's like I it helps me appreciate the fact that I didn't, how horrible it is, and the kinds of feelings that are there of like this feeling in particular. What I think of as the normal soldier who's like, thank God, like Achilles is here,
Oh, okay, okay. So the
right? And
Greeks
it's
are
like,
like, oh, finally,
yeah, it's a
the
pause.
cavalry's arrived.
Yeah, and it's like
Yeah.
and it's that feeling that it always gives me, it always makes me feel something very powerful.
Okay, so
That's
help
one
me
of
to
many.
remember. Help me to remember here because in that scene, because I that scene marks me too. If I'm not mistaken, there is a fight that's going on over the body of Patroclus. Hector has taken the armor, but also the Trojans want
Yes.
to take the body of Patroclus. And Menelaus is doing his best to defend the body so that the Trojans don't take it and mutilate it. And that's the moment that Achilles comes out and yells. He's got nothing. It's just Achilles. And he just yells and everybody stops and freezes. And that allows the Greeks to keep the body of Patroclus.
Yes.
And so it's also kind of this motivational part of Achilles. Like, no, you're not going to take my lover's body. No.
Yeah, I don't know if he was a lover. I know everybody wants to say that, but okay, we'll move on from that. Yeah, so that's definitely what's
I
happening. Is
mean,
there's the fights, but there's more than that.
think
Like,
about committing suicide for a friend that dies.
yeah, but like this is his whole, like he's been doing this since he was like 11, war, and this his only friend is Patroclus,
Yeah.
and it's like what you see this in war movies, in war stories, where the band of brothers, the love you have of a brother on the field, and I think that's more akin to what we're seeing. But yeah, and there's more to it because so like that Antilochus thing, I've kind of found it here in my version
Yeah.
is one of the important things about it is that what Achilles does is he takes a little bit of dirt and he sprinkles it on himself. And that's what you do. Like, um, oh no, the Greek woman,
Antigone.
Antigone does that to her brother. That is how you bury somebody.
Yeah.
he has accepted him. He is dead. Like he has died. And like
Oh, that's
and like
fascinating.
and
That's
so
fascinating because he knows he's going to go back into the fight. And
yeah,
he knows that the prophecy says, if I go back, if I'm fighting, I'm going to
yeah.
die. He's accepting his
He's
own fate at
accepting
this
death. Yeah.
moment that,
I get
yeah,
chills every time because that's part of what's going on
that's
with him
cool.
is he's trying to accept like his two courses in life are he's going to go home, marry a woman, live a long life and die and no one will remember him. And then he says, "Nope, I'm dying now. I'm dead and I've
I'm
accepted
dying
death."
because I need
And
to
I've heard that
avenge.
quote
Yeah.
many times. Like there's a quote in Band of Brothers, which I love the show Band of Brothers, and he's like one of the captains is saying like you just don't see how simple it is. You're a soldier when you accept that you're already dead. That's when you become a good soldier. And it's like I always get chills at that because that's like a terrible part of war
Mhm.
is that you're like you could die at any moment. And this whole thing is him trying to go back to home and enjoy his life, and he gets sucked back into it because the only person he ever loved is dead. Besides his
Yeah.
father, right?
Yeah.
He loves his father, but the person he loved personally, and people often interpret that as homosexually. Maybe it is. I don't know, but whatever. So that, and then I'll just say quickly, we don't have to get into it. Book 9, the embassy to Achilles, which I kind of already mentioned. That's one of my favorite parts because I think it's one of the most individualistic things ever, and it's sets off, in my view, like so much discussion about Greek culture going forward. It like sets the tone of Greek culture, of this individuality on some level, because he's making arguments as to for all these things about why he no longer agrees with the fundamental Greek culture that he's accepted, that they're all living in. So they're all living in this Greek culture of glory and honor, and that's what they live in. That's everything. Sarpedon has this great speech. There's this character on the Achilles side and the Greek side. It's like, why do we get the best meat? Why are we the ones who eat first? Well, because we're the first ones in the line. We're the front line men. And there's this famous speech on heroism that Sarpedon gives about why they are heroes and why they get the best stuff. And it's because they're the ones who are most likely to die first, and they're the strongest and the best at that. There's the intellectual, the philosopher Leonard Peikoff in Dim Hypothesis says he thinks the thesis or the theme of this is how the weak rely on the strong, in a sense, and that it's a strong culture, and so
The theme
Achilles
of what? Of the Iliad?
of the theme of the Iliad of because Achilles is the strongest of them all. He retires, they all die, and he comes back. Like that's the fundamental. Anyway, we'll not have to debate that or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah. So book 9 is really. I mean, there's just so much about this
So one
book.
thing that's really interesting in the two perspectives that we're bringing to the Iliad, what I'm learning from you is looking at it kind of more from the battle and soldiers mentality. So bringing in Band of Brothers, bringing in this idea of glory and death and those aspects of it. I'll touch on that embassy again
Sure.
because I think for me the climactic moment is the second embassy to Achilles. So to take us through the rest of the story here, Patroclus is killed
Oh,
and
I think I know. Yeah, yeah.
Achilles blames himself
Hmm.
for the death of Patroclus. It's my fault. He wouldn't have gone out there if I were out there.
Hmm.
And so he's going to take his anger at the beginning, that rage from the beginning takes a second level, and Agamemnon is no longer the beneficiary of that rage. It's going to be Hector. And so he kills Hector and he mutilates that body and he wants it to stay mutilated. It's not going to be touched. It's not going to be buried. He wants the dogs to eat it, the crows to eat it. He wants to. That's the anger is on Hector, who killed his beloved Patroclus. And then, of course, Hector's father comes
Mm.
in the middle of the night, helped by the gods secretly, to Achilles' tent to beg for the body of Hector back. Just like it was important for Achilles to have Patroclus's body, to honor him, to make sure he gets to the underworld with a proper burial. So Priam needs to have his son back.
Mhm.
And in that previous embassy, there's one complaint that Achilles makes. He said, "You're offering me everything, but I don't give up rat's ass about what you're offering me. I don't think Homer says that. I think Homer says, like Achilles says, the gifts you give could number the grains of sand in the world, and I would not want them. And he points out one thing that didn't happen in the sympathy. Where is Agamemnon? Agamemnon himself is not coming to speak to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
And he says that. But Priam comes to him. And do you remember what? I'm curious about different translations. Do you remember what Priam's first words to Achilles are when he kind of miraculously appears in his tent and lunges at the knees of Achilles to embrace them and to kiss his feet? Do you remember what his first words are?
What I don't remember. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly how it's phrased, but I'm pretty sure it's the line like, "No father has ever had to kiss the hands of the man who slayed his son."
That's in
Like
there.
that.
That's in
Is
there.
that the
Now,
first
in the
line?
Stephen Mitchell translation, here are the first words.
Okay.
Remember your father, Achilles.
Okay, that's okay. That makes more sense.
Remember your father, Achilles.
Yeah. And now that you're pointing it out, that I'm remembering I'm remembering one of the important parts of that is the line that Priam is balancing with a lot of wisdom of using these images and trying to keep Achilles from going over the edge and killing him. Like there's a moment when it's like Achilles might actually, he said, like, don't go farther, essentially, I'll kill you. Like, and there's like Priam is balancing this line because he's very wise. I think that's part of Priam's character is he's a wiser leader. I think that's what you're saying in a sense versus Agamemnon. So like he didn't send an embassy to Achilles. He went himself. He grabbed in complete vulnerability, right? He's an old man. He's never fought. Like Agamemnon fights. Agamemnon's a beast, right? He's out there. He's got his Aristeia, is what they call it, his day of shining and fighting and destroying. Priam's really ancient old. He's got 50 sons and they're fighting, but he's old. And so he goes there feebled, and it makes Achilles think of his father. And then, like you're saying, I think there's, you know, he asks for concessions. And I don't remember all of them in line at the moment, but he asks for him to do this, to do that, to give us. And Achilles is like, "Don't push it," like, and you're staying here, and there's things like that. Where it's
Oh,
like,
hold on one moment. I think I've got a very different feel than that.
okay,
I feel the sense I have from what I've read is when Priam asks Achilles to empathize with him, think of your father,
yes,
because what will he feel if he knew that you were dead? And for Achilles, it doesn't really have to be a hypothetical because he knows he's going to die and he knows his dad is going to mourn him. So he is seeing now Priam as kind of his dad. He is empathizing, putting himself in the place of Hector. I'm going to be Hector one day. I'm going to be dead, and my dad is going to be just like Priam. And what if my dad didn't get my body back?
no,
So
we're agreeing. That I think is the most important thing. I was just trying to
yeah,
emphasize.
and then the key thing is that Achilles weeps and agrees you can
Yeah,
have the body back. That's
I
the
mean,
key thing.
this is
Yeah,
all I'm saying is like
yeah,
Hector says, "I found it," or Priam says, "Do not ask me to sit down. Do not delay me. Accept great
yeah.
ransom. May you enjoy it and return safely to the land of your father." And then Achilles says something like, it says in my translation, looking blackly at him, swift-footed Achilles replied, "Now don't push me too far, venerable sir. I have made my mind up without your help to give Hector back to you." And he goes on. So all I'm saying, my point was,
Yeah.
your point is great because I agree with that. That's the fundamental is this is an inner emotional experience that Achilles has of empathy that which had failed in the first one in a sense, right? The first one, Phoenix,
That's right. That's right.
gives a story about Meleager, who he's
Yeah.
trying to tell him the story about like this guy didn't do what you should be doing, and look at what happened. And it's this
Yeah.
whole long story,
Yeah.
and he doesn't learn it.
Yeah.
He doesn't take that, and later though he does learn the lesson, but it took the killing of his best friend and the accepting of his fate and his death, and then now he has empathy for his father through.
That's yeah.
I think you're
Two
100%
attempts at arousing empathy. The second
yeah.
one, as you pointed out, he's being vulnerable. He's there himself. Priam is there himself, being
And
vulnerable,
that
being
as a good
open.
leader. And I'm trying to like I think
Yeah.
Priam is just a great leader, and that's part of what makes him great. And yeah. So I think everyone should read the Iliad. And
What what do you
that's
take
my
away from it? What do you take away from the Iliad?
what do I take away from the Iliad? Like like one thing?
Sure.
I don't know if I have a one thing. I have so many things. I mean,
What's something that you take away from the Iliad?
I mean the origins of Western individualism
Mm,
is one thing.
mhm.
I mean, on a personal level, I mean, that's one broad thing, which we all, again, take for granted that it just exists. And I think we should understand the value structure we live in. And that's another thing I take out of it is like reading great literature, the canonical works. Why I'm so passionate about it is because what Achilles discovers is how to break out or try to break out and understand the value structures that he's in. He's fighting for glory and honor, for stuff, and for people talking about him. That's the values that he's fighting for. And he realizes to get out of it. I think we need to do that today. Like we need to be and to do that, like we need to be able to understand the structures that shape our own minds and our own behaviors. What do we value and how much of it is ours versus put onto us by society that we live in. And I always Achilles is a model for me in the early days. He's not a full model, and obviously it goes the other way, but he's like someone who tries to get out of this, structure. And then, I just, all the speeches, I feel bad for Hector. I mean, there's just so many personal little stories, this great war story, and yeah, things I've already said. What about you?
You talk about the structures that he gets out of. I think for me, it's getting breaking out of the emotional constraints that he has.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
He is filled with anger and he sees what that anger sows. And it makes me think, shit, if I hold on to this anger, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt me and it's going to hurt people I love. And that's what happens there. And then the solution to getting out of this anger is to empathize,
Mm-hmm.
is to look at that person that you're angry at and maybe to see a common humanity. And that common humanity is part of that cycle of life that you've talked about. We're going to die. There's going to be weeping. There's going to be sadness between all these human beings, whether they're Trojan or Greek. And we have all the same fate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the beginning of the canon for a reason. Any version of the canonical works of Western
All right.
literature should
Yeah,
be.
there's so much more that I
Yeah,
can
I could
talk
keep
about the
going.
connections to
I haven't even
other
gone into
ancient Greek
translations.
culture,
Yeah,
the influences that the Iliad has on later works, similar, heroes. Is Achilles a great hero? All this
so
kind of stuff.
much.
Yeah.
It's endless.
All right, Kirk, this
So,
is a lot of fun.
yeah, no, thanks for coming up with the idea. It's a good timing. I'm starting up the Canon Club again. So go to troubadour.studio and you could find out more about the Literary Canon Club for 2025. And go check out touchingtheart.com and literature at our house.com for Luke. So thank you and see you next time.